or of you people free. So let's jump into part 3 this week in GeoPolitics of Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 105. And I'm going to connect the dots between Nigeria, Israel, and Sudan. And I'm going to show how this is leading to a global shift in power. And they are weaponizing, the proof of weapons network is weaponizing religion in order to fool you. And if you are a node on social media, your feed would have been full of thank you, Mr. Trump. Thank you for looking after the Christians. Thank you for doing what you're going to be doing. It's long overdue. And if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know thank you, Mr. Trump. Thank you, Mr. Trump. You'll know that the American military-industrial complex is the one paying for the covert operations. It's leading to the deep state killing in order to get those resources. So we're going to make sure that you understand the different players, how they fit together, and suddenly, after decades of crimes against humanity, why you suddenly believe that you're saving the Christians in Nigeria and you're caring about the Muslims in Sudan. And of course, you're caring about the useful idiot Jews that built an army that work for Israel in order to manage the profits of the military-industrial complex. And what are they pushing out on social media? Hatred towards Jews, hatred towards Muslims, so that the Christians can believe that they're being invaded by Muslims and taken over by Jewish power. That is the racial and religious destabilization campaign. And you're either a useful idiot for that agenda because they want to divide and conquer. Divide and conquer is because the proof of weapons network is taking the tactics that they used to use across the global south and they're bringing them back home. And that's why you're getting civil unrest across Europe. That's why you're getting open borders and closed borders, because they get to vassalize and they are looking to scrape and asset strip the last assets of the West while they hedge their bets and invest in multipolarity with the countries that are actually sovereign and still have their birth rates intact and still have their sovereign wealth to be able to co-invest and their energy that they need. Okay, so what happened this week? Well, you had a video which was Trump threatening an intervention for the Christians in Nigeria. And so if you watch the video, it looked very much like the 12-day war theater between Iran and Israel, where he comes out all aggressive and comes and they read the script and he comes out and he said, we are saving the Christians that are being targeted because we care. We care about the profits of the military-industrial complex. And I'm told to say that. And I was written that script by the agenda that I'm fueling as well. So anyway, it felt very, very scripted. It fell a lot of people. It went completely viral across social media. And it looked like a sequel to the Iran-Israel 12-day war, which if anyone was watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, they'll know that we were covering it and saying, yeah, this gives Iran the narrative, Israel the narrative, and America narrative they need as they usher in those narratives. But it was never a real war. It wasn't like Iraq. It was actually agreed and I believe theater and led to the outcome that we were predicting, which was what we've seen ever since then. Don't want to go too deep into that as well. Okay, so if something breaks out in Nigeria, maybe we get some controlled strikes. My prediction is that it won't last long. America can no longer do the forever war in regions outside of its sphere of influence. It can only do it in Europe. It can only do it in Mexico, Latin America, South America, Central America, Canada. It can only do it in its regional Greenland, in its regional control. But Africa is rare earth mineral China territory, BRICS territory, and GCC Gulf Cooperation Council territory, which has been aligning with its North American corridor in order to have those rare earth minerals. And China has been investing through its Belt and Road Initiative to de-dollarize and reverse the International Monetary Fund, financial weapons of mass destruction, covert regime changes, death, destruction, and violence, and paid insurrections that by Western militia paid for by USAID and the National Endowment of Democracy. And for those that don't remember, the Department of Government Efficiency, remember they said $697 million in 2024 went into ISIS and Al-Qaeda training camps so that they can use these militias to pretend that it's about Muslims killing Christians or Muslims killing Jews, when they use them in order to destabilize regions and gain access to the routes and the corridors and things they need. So if we get anything, I believe that anything we see in Nigeria, firstly, it probably won't happen, but I did say that about Iran and Israel. I didn't think it would escalate, but once it did escalate, I realized it was theater. And so I'm going to take that learning and apply it here. If it does escalate, it will be pre-agreed strikes to an agreed outcome, and China and the GCC would be on board with that outcome. And Nigeria would also be on board for that outcome. It will all be theater. It will be dressed up in religious narrative, but it's actually most likely a retreat from the US and Europe across the African colonized regions and a strategic handover via a BlackRock operation, which is splitting the world up into multipolarity. And they want regional stability within Africa. And so therefore they're taking America out because now the African countries are choosing who they want to get their investment from. Do they want it from China? Do they want it from IMF? And everybody's choosing China because the terms are less predatory than the IMF. And China's not saying how to govern their country, whereas the IMF is using neoliberalism, installing their central banks, taking over their resources, putting insurrections, doing destabilization campaigns, putting in their puppet governments, sending them money and corrupting and keeping the countries in poverty so that they can never build and have their own manufacturing base and their own resources. So everybody's choosing China. Just look across anyone. I was on Spaces all this week. All the Nigerian business people were saying we use everything as with China. You know, it's Chinese electric cars, Chinese 5G networks with Huawei, Chinese investments and infrastructure. You know, and they recognize the past. These were destabilized countries as a result of the post-World War II Bretton Woods order as well. So anyway, I think this will be another managed handover if we get anything, but it might just be narrative, and it might be the strategic exit, because who are the militia? The militia are backed by Western interests. Western interests are government subordinate to the Proof of Weapons Network, and they want the financial industrial complex to be able to invest in regional stability. So my forecast and my prediction is that they're trying to lever as many assets as possible. They're trying to strong arm. They're trying to draw these conflicts to a close, and then they'll stop backing and they'll integrate the militia into the armed forces. But they won't be able to, the Western forces won't be able to influence. So again, this is all about the multipolar world order that I think we're managing the handover to. So I think it's going to be a quiet retreat. Obviously, Trump gets his Nobel Peace Prize. Everyone gets to call him saving the Christians, but then they also get to say he's the peace negotiator. So that helps him, but he gets all his deals and everything in the back end as well. So anyway, let me just cover a little bit of Nigeria so you understand the background, because I also want to connect it to what's happening in Sudan and what's happening in the Israel-Gaza side right now. So if you are falling for the narrative, let me give you the red pill and the wake-up call. There are 250 million Nigerians in Nigeria. And half of them approximately are Christian and half of them are Muslim. So this is a Muslim and Christian country by half and half. Now, traditionally, there are more Muslims in the north and there were more Christians in the south. But there was an offshoot of ISIS, which is Western-backed militia, came from the Iraqi war and the Afghan, Operation Gladio, where the West was creating the stay-at-home armies. And then they pay these radicalized, basically destroy their family, put them in training camps. and then make them think it's something to do with religion, radicalize the Christians into hating Muslims, radicalize the Jews into going to Israel so they join the IDF and engage in ethnic cleansing and destabilization of the Middle East, and then radicalize a subset of the Muslims and make them think it's something to do with the religion when it's got virtually nothing to do with the actual practice of Islam, and create these subsets that are poor, broke, radicalized, and pay them, weaponize them, arm them, and then you get to do these covert wars where you take over the resources and use Western narratives to make it think it's something else. So you had ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then an offshoot of that was Boko Haram. And so they are an offshoot of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they basically have been, slaughtering Nigerians for decades. Now, America didn't care about them because it is America. It is Western interest. It is done through these covert operations and a subset of the military-industrial complex. So they don't bring any attention to it for decades. And there's no president across the entire history of America that's never really said anything about this, because it's a deep state proof of weapon network operation, and governments are subordinate to that as well. And this is all about resources. So now we are pivoting to the military-industrial complex forever war model, destabilizing the region, to a China-BRICS-aligned model. And so what is the last bit of power they can get? Well, they want to invest in regional stability. That's the financial industrial complex part of it. So you destabilize in order to get to regional stability. So maybe that's what the operation. And then when you hear narratives like security, so obviously the Nigerians know these are real slaughters. This is real violence. The proof of weapons network doesn't have any ethics or morality. I mean, it doesn't give a damn about religion, life. The whole dollar is backed by genocide, as the pound was. We've seen that already. You think what's happening in Gaza we saw that on camera, but this has been happening all along across Africa. But no one talks about it. But when you hear narratives like security, think Palantir. So these are probably negotiations for the technical industrial complex, which is why the stock price of Palantir is way, way, way above any kind of its revenue. And it's all government contracted with Peter Thiel and Alex Carr, who were essentially agents that were CIA funded and got Jeffrey Epstein funded back in the day as well. Now, who are they negotiating with? So Trump creates a narrative. It's the Christians. It's the Islamists taking on the Christians. We're going to save the Christians. That means this is a negotiation between the technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, negotiating with China. China is negotiating the exit because China empowers BRICS. And so across different areas of Africa, you have Russia via Wagner, which is fighting the ISIS. So the ex-ISIS leader is now the president of Syria. Why is that? So people think he's Israel aligned. He's actually backed by Turkey and the GCC, because the original source of these insurrections and militia was Saudi Arabia. When Saudi Arabia was on the boot of America, before it had built up its sovereign wealth and it started to align with BRICS and now get to reduce the petrodollar, it always had to work and normalize with Israel. And so you went through, there's two sources of power in Saudi Arabia. One is the Wahhabi subset that are ultra. That's where much of this radicalized ideology come from. The real hardliners were breeded in Saudi Arabia. And then you had the kingdom, and the kingdom went through, family shifts. Originally it was taking on Western powers. Then it was moving towards partnering with Western powers, but having these resistance movements radicalized in order to gain negotiation. But MBS has been fighting against that. So it is the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the monarchy, and they have been fighting against the radicalized factions of these Wahhabi and training camps. And obviously, the Western media creates a narrative that MBS is not Muslim and controlled by Zios. Who benefits from that? Israel. And so if Israel can push out the narrative that they control all of these kingdoms, then that gives them more power, which is why you have the Jewish conspiracy. They do have power, factions of power, but Israel is just a colony for the military-industrial complex, which creates these destabilization campaigns and has these off-balance sheet black op operations. And so the president of Syria is ex-ISIS, rebranded, which is a puppet for Turkey and the GCC, because all the regions are moving to regional stability. And that's the greater change that's happening because, they negotiated with the financial industrial complex and joined BlackRock and allowed BlackRock to get their office, but they remain sovereign as a sovereign wealth fund. So all the deals, this is why Israel is being dumped right now, because the finance companies are partnering with the Gulf countries. And so, the ex-ISIS leader that is head of Syria right now is a Turkey and GCC puppet. Giuliani visited the White House recently. So while the White House and the military-industrial complex are funding militias in Nigeria to destabilize based upon offshoots of ISIS, Trump is meeting another offshoot of ISIS and the leader in the White House because they made him put a suit on because he's working with the GCC, and now Israel is no longer needed. This is why Israel is fighting like a drunken sailor to try and maintain power, because it can't maintain power, and that's the connection that we'll need. So Syria and Giuliani are most likely to be joining the Abraham Accords, and the Abraham Accords is where the GCC bought Trump via Jared Kushner's fund, invested $2 billion, and all the other Gulf countries and various other factions of power got to invest. And China obviously normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this is where BRICS started to de-dollarize with the Gulf countries. And that's why we're getting this strategic realignment that we're seeing in the world right now. We had an announcement from Trump that Kazakhstan has joined the Abraham Accords. That was just announced. And the Proof of Weapons Network and the US are basically assisting ISIS in the Syria side. But now it's for stabilization rather than destabilization. So if you need to get rid of any of the radical hardliners that were aligned with the previous Assad regime, then he's executing those operations, which is why every now and then you see these killing sprees, but it's not Christians. And you see that across Syria. It's Christians, it's Muslims, it's Kurds, it's every type. But they just put a narrative out there in order to gain more leverage for these negotiations, because what does the finance want to do? That's why they destroyed Syria in the first place. That's why they funded ISIS to create, in 2011 to make the destabilization campaign, because they wanted to vassalize the region. And now it's in, Iran has bought into regional stability. Iran funded the militia to fight back against that, created all the sectarian divides. And we've covered Syria many times, so I don't want to go through in those complications. But essentially, BRICS and the GCC overthrew the Assad regime that happened in Syria. And that was agreed, from my perspective, with both Iran, Saudi, and all the forces, China, Russia, and America, and the Proof of Weapons Network, which is why it happened so easily. So the Proof of Weapons Network, for those that get it now, are using Boko Haram basically to leverage a US exit from the African region. And this will be BRICS and GCC territory. And so far, from the deals that we've seen, of course, there's exploitation because China has the money. But so far, there's been massive investment. And so Nigeria has been transformed by China. Now, in the West, they'll call it complete the IMF strategy, debt dependency, vassalization, because that's how the IMF did things. So far, China hasn't done the same way because they allow you to have your own governance. Now, of course, they get the best terms in their interest. And we'll talk about all the China exploitation as it happens as well. But it's nothing like America, Europe, and the IMF strategies as well. And so this is why we're seeing all of these battles right now and all of these narratives. They need you to believe that when they intervene in order to have decisive exits, to give negotiation power, to move to regional stability, that you're taking your hard-earned money that is printed and created inflation, sending it over to the military-industrial complex, because they're saying, if we're going to exit the region, give us more and more money, which is fiscal dominance, and then allow the banks to invest in the rebuild, and we'll get some shares in the banks as well. That's how this proof of weapons network works and hedges, and BlackRock manages these portfolios. So Russia at the moment via Wagner is fighting ISIS in Burkina Faso and Mali. And so, and you're getting Burkina Faso that is having a model that moves out the Russian imperialists, the US imperialists, and at the same time, they're getting ISIS insurrections with Wagner resisting against that. And they're in the middle of all these territorial battles. And that's what we're witnessing at the moment. But I have real hopes that under this new model of multipolarity, that for the first time in over centuries, the global south is going to be a rising power because they're having all the children. They're not psyops. They've got the birth rate still. And the Middle East has got the energy for all of this artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence will take out all the employment in the West. And that will push you into a universal basic income, which is why you need the technical state and police state and surveillance state, digital ID, and all the technology that's being beta tested across the region. All of it was beta tested in all of these war zones, and then is coming back by the privatized ICE, which is the privatized prisons, the privatized deportations that receive money from the big beautiful bill for every deportation and every single arrest. And so it's a big factory of recycling money in a debt-based Ponzi scheme, and it's reaching its breaking point because the average American just can't afford to live, and they're supplemented by debt and getting drug addiction, homelessness, and suicides. So this is, the dollar is backed by, this is why I'm excited by multipolarity. This is why I want people to exit with Bitcoin. This is why when the price of gold goes up and I can see that people are selling dollars, because this leads to a lot less death and destruction. The US global hegemon and the British global hegemon was an evil debt-based Ponzi scheme. You were just told that you were civilizing and exporting democracy. All of it is coming to roost now. History is being rewritten, and everybody's discovering, how much they were lied to. So anyway, the proof of weapons network and BRICS and the GCC will eventually be aligning, is my prediction. And the US and the European Union will exit. France is doing more and more exit. France is bankrupt, may need an IMF bailout. And that's how the IMF can exert its influence over Europe, which is being vassalized into the proof of weapons network, which is why Europe is becoming a war zone. And that's the purpose of Ukraine, and why the CIA escalated the NATO expansion. The European Central Bank was printing all the money for the European Union in order to go over to prop up the US stock market. Trump negotiated the deal, and that's what he's doing for the proof of weapons network. So it doesn't help the American people, but it does help the American stock market, which is why I say the system is socialism for the stock market. And all the other people, they get to say, don't give me any socialism or communism because I'm a real capitalist. When all you're doing is paying the highest interest rates because the banks have got a special super subsidy by having the 0% interest rate and the ability to create the money every time they issue a loan in the dollar. So I put this post on X. Please follow me on X if you're not. That's where I give real-time update. And this is the post that I gave to give a more accurate assessment. So when Trump said, we're going to be saving the Christians in Nigeria, let me retranslate what it should have said. It should have said Nigerians, both Christians and Muslims, are being killed by foreign-backed militia groups that call themselves Muslims, so that Chevron, ExxonMobil, Palantir, and the financial industrial complex can negotiate better terms on the resources because all the local businesses are working with China, and America and the IMF are losing interest. So we're managing an exit, and the technical industrial complex and the financial industrial complex, they want Palantir, they want digital IDs, they want central bank digital currencies, which were all tested out in Nigeria by the corrupt puppet Nigerian government that is now hopefully going to have a better model because of the regional vision. And what does China want? China wants everyone to have bigger economies so they can buy their products. And so they're investing in infrastructure. So really what we're witnessing right now across the global south, across the Middle East, across Africa is that China is basically building an alternative financial system. They're giving them technical options. And basically, while one country is making sure that they're destabilized, America is destabilizing and historically destabilized the countries. They know what's going on. I was on Spaces with all the Nigerians. They're not stupid like the West. They haven't been propagandized. They know what's going on. Some of them are obviously agents that are funded to push out an agenda, but they know they're being taken advantage of. They know what the reality is. All of them were saying it's not targeting Christians. There is, persecution of different groups, but the killing is equal. In fact, more Muslims have been killed than Christians, is what they were saying based upon their numbers. But one country is making sure that they can never rise, and the other country is basically building them up so that they can buy the products. So China has invested $21 billion in Nigeria in 2025 alone. They've done construction deals. They're building them up. They did a new $3.5 billion partnership for solar grids. And so they're giving them solar energy so that they can get some energy independence as well. They're giving them rail modernization programs as well, industrial corridors. So improving the infrastructure. Isn't that what America should be doing? Why don't they do that? Because the dollar is created for corporate interests, and you think crony capitalism is capitalism. So you complain if the government ever does anything for you. Now, why do you think we're getting this shift towards, socialism? And it's not socialism. It's still the same thing. Anyway, you think really that Trump cares about Nigerian Christians all of a sudden? Please. And you think he's acting independently for America's interest? Allowing the global south to rise, taking out the deep state, is exactly what the financial industrial complex wants in order to move to a multipolar world. But you need to believe it's because he's making America great again. Get smarter. Follow the money. Stop listening to them. And you'll find the truth. And again, it's not Trump derangement syndrome. I'll do the same with Biden. And if we end up with some other, Democratic president next, or J.D. Vance, who was funded by Peter Thiel, who was groomed by investments from Jeffrey Epstein, funding and creating the technology that's doing genocide as a service in Gaza, occupation as a service in West Bank, integrated into drones in Ukraine for BlackRock to gain more power and hand over and sacrificing Ukrainians so that Russia ends up with the vast rare earth minerals, and is doing digital IDs and integration with the health service, creating the police state across UK, across the European Union, manufacturing civil unrest, has been part of open border, closed border policy across America, implementing the legal changes and Stargate and the integrations with the Department of Government Efficiency data that artificial intelligence took out, and integration with Elon Musk's social credit score by giving us freedom of speech and freedom of reach, and the eventual stablecoin standard across America and central bank digital currency across the European Union that was beta tested in Nigeria. If you think that's your man, I don't know what to say anymore. So Africa and the global south, I believe that there will be a rise. I believe that the Middle East are going to be regionally stable. I believe that the proof of weapons network is getting as much power as it's possible. And I believe the colonized had to partner with them and get co-investments in regional stability. And they partnered with China in order to make that happen. And that is because America doesn't rule the world anymore, and Israel certainly doesn't rule the world, because Israel gains its power from America, which means it's got to be subservient to military as well. So this requires a multipolar world, as I said, and this is why people call me a doomer, because I'm just forecasting what I think is happening in the West by following the money. But it's very good for other regions, and you need to decide where you're going to live, what you're going to be a part with, where you're going to put your money, how you spend your money. Do you boycott this? Do you empower this? Are you happy with this? Once you know the truth, you make your decisions. I ain't going to judge you. I just want to make sure that you're not ignorant to what's happening here and how this works. Okay. So here's what I say. So who is the proof of weapons network negotiating with? Well, it's negotiating with. Now, in order to gain leverage over BRICS, they look at how to have a weakest link. And that weakest link has always been India. And so that's why you get these conflicts between Pakistan and India that get resolved. These are the negotiation tactics. You know, we've seen this pattern again and again. So look back at what happened between Pakistan and India, the narrative that Trump gave, and then you can get an idea of what may happen with the Nigerian side. And you just need to believe that you're doing it for the Christians in order to buy into all the BS. The lead power of BRICS is China. Obviously, we've covered that one. Also, they're trying to get leverage by negotiating with the Gulf countries, the GCC. And who is the weak link in the GCC? Well, it's UAE. UAE is kind of like a good cop, bad cop. You have the lead power of the GCC is Saudi Arabia, but UAE has to do deals with Western powers. That means that whether it goes to whichever side it goes to China or it goes to America, across the bloc, they have everything covered. So UAE needs to look like the simp to Zionism in Israel, and dealing contracts with America, which is why the UAE is the only country that can invest in the Israel stock market, which means that UAE is able to acquire the assets for the GCC as they partner with the financial industrial complex. And that's how you vassalize and turn Israel into a toxic asset as well. And so obviously, if you're negotiating with UAE, which is a node in the GCC proof of weapons network, then good cop, bad cop is one way of doing that. Then you can win in all negotiations. And this is what you see. But you got to follow the money. You got to be a bit smarter and get through the narrative. Now, they do a carrot and stick. The carrot is regional stability. And the stick in this case was Iran, the axis of resistance, Qatar, those different narratives. But they're all normalized, and I'm seeing regional stability like I've never seen before. Why? Because China, I've covered this many times, China aligned the carrot and the stick and allowed de-dollarization. And now you got a normalization between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran, which historically have been the enemies. And that was all done through the BRICS and GCC partnership when Iran, UAE, and Egypt joined BRICS and joined Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Then that's what you're witnessing right now. So what are they doing? They're buying American assets and they're investing in regional stability. As I said, UAE is the only one that can buy Tel Aviv stocks. So UAE will be the one that ends up buying a lot of the Israel stuff. So if you're negotiating with UAE, you need UAE to look as bad as possible. And I covered this one last week. Hence, Sudan. And so let's give a little bit of an update and a little bit more of the details. So last week I covered Sudan. I wanted to give it the attention it deserves. It is, look, I've got two hats. It is a humanitarian crisis. It is a disaster. The crimes against humanity are some of the worst in the world right now. You know, what we saw in Gaza is what we're seeing in Sudan without the attention, without the global attention. And so I shared a bit of the detail around how Sudan historically, through sanctions, was weaponized by Western interests that were extracting resources. This led to extremists that would rise up and create resistance that would be funded by the Sudanese government. And then this led to resistance against that led to coups. Those RSF created crimes against humanity. And then that region either goes to America and the West, or it goes into the GCC power structure. And so different parts of the GCC are backing the different factions. So whatever the outcome of this internal coup and civil unrest that was originally manufactured from West, but also has interest because the UAE is invested across the region and has gold trade that we covered last week. In that dynamic and that level of nuance, the UAE, you put the public attention to it and it looks awful. And it deserves the bad attention because this is crimes against humanity. So I wanted to cover a bit of the detail, and it's very sensitive because I want to just follow the money, but at the same time, just like with Gaza, it's horrible on the practicality section, what's actually happening, because anyone that's following this, I'm glad it's getting the attention. But at the same time, I know why it's getting the attention. It's getting the attention because the Proof of Weapons Network wants to negotiate, draw this to a close, which I want to happen, but on their terms. So they're leveraging what UAE is backing in order to give more power to the Proof of Weapons Network. And so by bringing this to the attention, everyone's a useful idiot, but it's worth it because this ends, and I want it to end, and I want the crimes against humanity so that we can get on with the regional stability section that has never been possible in the past. So that nuance I want to come out, and I tried to do it last week when we covered it. But from my perspective, I analyzed Evan on X, who's, I think, and the Middle Nation team, and their different analysis. They're on slightly different sides to this. I want to go through some of the monetary flows that I covered from his expertise in the region. So the UAE isn't actually trying to take over all the mines, but it already has deals with all the mines that are controlled either by SIF and RAF as well. So what the UAE want from this understanding and this analysis is they want the gold to keep flowing into Dubai's refineries and Dubai's markets, because Dubai is a massive center for gold. And much of that gold is controlled by the forces within Sudan, and they're committing crimes against humanity. And so no matter who ends up holding the shovel and digging the gold out of the ground, they still want the flows to come through. And so that's why they're getting a lot of the negative attention, and quite rightly. But the RSF essentially controls most of the Western gold. And so all of the gold fields are controlled by the RSF. Now, if the RSF didn't have a market for selling it, which is the gold markets in Dubai, then, they would not have their main financial backing. Now, if Dubai stops funding it, then it goes over to Western forces, ISIS insurrections, various other destabilization. And then the resources still flow anyway. And so it is, that's the nuance in the situation. And it's a tragedy as well. So there are tax revenue that I believe comes through from the diggers. They load the metal basically onto unmarked planes. And then they fly it straight to the UAE. It then gets sold through the markets. And in return, the UAE essentially receives, sends some cash. You end up with fuel or resources that are needed. And any of the spare parts or anything that the RSF may need, it goes into these Toyota fleets and various other things. And then maybe some of these weapons that were made in China, where Chad has a deal with the UAE that they provide the weapons, and because they have shared security contracts, and then maybe Chad imports some of those weapons over through to the RSF, and maybe those weapons had ended up in Chad and Libya that was destabilized deliberately by NATO, and the reason they took out Gaddafi. And the NATO forces stole all those gold and created all of the oil fields and black op operations and all of the destabilization campaigns that have haunted the region. I'm hoping that this means it's coming to an end because of the attention. But the RSF is essentially delivers raw gold from the flows that are understood as well. And the war keeps the price high because there's no competition. There's no one else to compete on the Sudanese gold. And so this creates a game where it's the longer it goes, the better. And that's why the proof of weapons network, if they're trying to do a deal with the GCC, they can weaponize the crimes against humanity by drawing attention to it in the media, and they get a higher negotiation with the whole GCC negotiation and the regional stability deals. So the media is drawing attention to it. And that's how it seems like the financial flows work as well. So the gold is the first point of leverage. The second is the port. Now, the port between UAE is actually based upon negotiations with the Sudanese government as well. So the RSF enemies is basically the Sudanese armed forces, the SAF. They were funded, and the RSF was originally created with Sudanese government funding in the first place. That's why they weren't externally created militia, but they were militia that led to a coup that was funded by the Sudanese government. So it's an internal civil war rather than external forces. But they already have deals with the port. And so this is the deals that it's giving the Sudanese armed forces the backing as well. So in a sense, UAE is backing both sides, and whichever way it goes, as this gets to resolution and the crimes against humanity end, they've got the port interest and the gold interest. Now, Saudi and Egypt are basically backing the SAF, the other side. And the SAF are committing crimes against humanity, but the RSF is much, much worse in terms of what we can see, in terms of all the UN reports and everything as well. So as a regional unit, the GCC is hedged. The UAE has the negotiation and the ability to buy Israeli stocks. That exerts that part of the relationship. And Saudi and Egypt are funding the other side, so that whatever happens, once this moves to regional stability, the GCC has interests aligned across the bloc, so that they don't end up back in the proof of weapons network. So the proof of weapons network is now using this in order to get more control. There is a company called DP World, which is the UAE's DP World is the major investor, and they basically run the docks as well. So whoever wins the war, they still get the terminal fees and the choke points, and it's paid in dirhams, which creates those flows to the UAE's currency as well. There's one more point, which is the third point in what's happening, which is once it moves to regional stability, just like with Gaza, there will be rebuild contracts. And the proof of weapons network wants as many of those rebuild contracts as possible to hedge away from the fact that there's less returns in the West. Just like they want the rebuild contracts in Gaza. And so you connect the two, and the media push gives more power to the proof of weapons network as well. So when the shooting stops, basically, someone has to rebuild. That's how these things happen. There'll be power grids. There'll be all sorts of stuff. They need to rebuild an airport, just like they will need to do in Gaza. There'll be bridges that need to be rebuilt. And UAE firms are basically already first in line with those rebuild contracts, and they've been pre-signed as well. And the payment is in long-term port concessions as well, or different types of mining licenses. So those are the monetary flows. And sadly, the longer this goes on for, the more those flows don't get disrupted. But that's why I think we're seeing the media push right now. And so obviously in Western media, they need UAE to look as bad as possible. And that's easy to do because these are crimes against humanity. So that's why you're seeing the uptick in the genocide coverage and everything we're seeing right now. I believe that this does lead to basically pressuring a phase out of the RSF, or them getting their own territory. And it seems like they control too much territory. And so it looks like they will be integrated into a part of the region. And then there will be maybe some separatist movement or something like that. But as I said, it's going to be on the proof of weapons network terms because the media push weakens UAE. And therefore the media is and the brutality is exactly how it is. But it's, I mean, if anyone watches the footage, like children are dropping dead, it's weaponizing starvation. It's the same thing we've seen from Israel in Gaza. And it's basically the largest displacement in the world today. I think 13 million displaced. The deaths are unbearable. You know, the RSF is a power structure that seems like it's gaining power. So we'll see where that goes. Anyway, it's very sensitive for me to talk about if you've watched any of the footage. Right. So what else did I want to cover? There was a little bit more to tie everything together. Just checking a few of the notes as well. I do want to point out as well that there was, from what I can tell as well, before back in the RSF, there was attempts to negotiate between the UAE and the Sudanese government. I think in 2021, I found as well that they inked basically a 30-year concession with the SAF. And that was going to be through DP World as well. And that was going to be running all the Sudanese ports and the terminals. They were going to be doing real estate trades. There was a deal done and the gold shipments were going to be continued. So the UAE did do that deal as well. But then it looked like since the coup, you know, they were hedging their bets as well. And then the crimes against humanity got worse and worse and worse. When they had the 2023 war, which escalated mid, you know, off before the Gaza side. And so that fell down because the SAF accused UAE of backing the RSF because they were hedging both sides, from what I can tell as well. Okay, I've covered a lot of details there. And I remember as well, from the research I said, I was looking at the currency wars. When the deal actually fell through, this led to a 40% overnight correction in the Sudanese pound as well, when the deal fell through. And 90% of SAF's gold exports are basically flowed through the UAE hubs at the time, but the RSF has been gaining more of that as well. Okay. Okay, trying to cut through some of this stuff because I've been going on for longer than I thought. While I'm doing this, make sure you like, retweet, share. We've got the final section right now. I'm also, for anyone that wants to carry on for longer, I'm going to play one of the interviews I did as well. So that if anyone's joined halfway through and they want to go through more and more of that. Okay, so as I covered last week, that's the reason why I was glad to see the proof of weapons network pushing up the media narrative, even though I knew that it would lead to strategic weakness on regional stability. But hopefully it draws it to terms, and this also impacts, I believe, the Gaza rebuild negotiations that are happening right now. So now let's connect it finally. We did Nigeria, we did Sudan. Now let's connect it to the Israel-Gaza side. I believe that basically what we're waiting for now is for the ceasefire and the 20-point plan to move to the next stage. Remember, there was a 21-point plan. It was essentially the proof of weapons network and the GCC's plan. Trump gets to put a sticker on it and say it was his plan. As soon as part of the plan, there will be Arab security forces that will enter into Palestine. And then for the first time, it won't be Israel providing the security. It will be the Arab forces as well. Now, as soon as that happens, that is essentially, I believe, the end of the Greater Israel project. This is where the leverage, it will be irreversible. The Greater Israel project will be over. I'd expect when the security comes in next, that we'll see destabilization campaigns, both in terms of regime changes in both Israel for a GCC puppet, Palestinian Authority for a GCC puppet, and Lebanon may already have the GCC puppet, de-weaponization of Hezbollah and Hamas agreeing to this, agreement from Iran without public agreement, but obviously they'll be doing via their line. I think you'd get integration of the Houthis into Yemen leadership as well, and the integration into Sudan and various other resolutions with Libya as well that we'll be covering in the future. But the next thing that we got announced is that we're waiting now. Why isn't the ceasefire holding to the extent that it should? Because we don't have the Arab security in yet. And so the military-industrial complex, via its proxy Israel, and via its cover from America, is managing the de-radicalization of the evangelical Christians by giving attention to Candace Owen, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, and simultaneously making sure that everyone in America hates Jews and hates Muslims. They're ratcheting up the Muslims are killing Christians narrative, and they're ratcheting up the narrative that Israel controls America narrative. So this allows the evangelical Christians to get de-radicalized, but also they can use that for the civil unrest campaign within America, so that they can get their surveillance state, their police state, and everything that's happening within America. So that serves that purpose. But within the US side, we're starting to see announcements as well. So there was an announcement, I think, this week from Reuters, or today, that's in line with what we were expecting next. I quote from Reuters, the US will share a draft resolution on President Donald Trump's peace plan for Gaza with the 10 elected members of the United Nations Security Council later on Wednesday. So next week, Wednesday, was expecting announcement of the United Nations Security Council with 10 different members. The US, and this was from a US official. Remember, this is the Proof of Weapons Network and GCC plan negotiation with a Trump label put on top of it. But as I said, once we get the Arab forces in, the Greater Israel project's over. And that was a destabilization project to radicalize Jews, to recruit an army, to engage in the ethnic cleansing, to have strategic tension between Iran, Saudi Arabia, divide and conquer, never allow anyone to compete, create the petrodollar, make sure they don't create a unified force, align with China, align with Russia, and basically stop what's happening now, which would be a multipolar world, and America is no longer the global hegemon. That's what the Greater Israel project was, and it was always the Greater American Military Industrial Complex project as well. But that project dies as soon as those security forces in. This will be, from my perspective, as big as an event as the fall of the Berlin Wall in terms of its implications, as well as World War II and Pearl Harbor. Those reset the world order. When security forces are in Palestine, that resets the world order. And this is official. It's not going back from my perspective by following the money. So who did they announce is going to make up part of that security force? So remember what I said? I said it will be most likely Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, and members of the GCC. So the representatives for the security force that they announced that are going to be there to make the announcement is Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and the US will be there as well in order to show clear regional support for the official, basically that's what the official said. So I think we're going to see everything move forward next week. Once that happens, Israel is a complete toxic asset. The distress in Israeli assets not being backed by the US military industrial complex makes the colony completely infeasible. And the financial distress is already showing itself right now. I think that will be weaponized to destabilize get rid of the hardliners, the Ben-Gvirs, the Smoldriches. Potentially, I don't know what Netanyahu, whether he managed to negotiate that he stays or whether he'll be part of the destabilization campaign. I know that's why, from my perspective, the genocide and starvation was weaponized, because he used his power as an outlet of the military industrial complex to gain leverage over the financial industrial complex to make sure he got his freedom. I'm not sure what we're going to happen there. What we'll see, I think he will eventually get an exit. But here's the thing. The next government or cabinet, I believe, will be GCC puppets, and their job will be to nationalize all assets in Israel, sell them off. UAE will be able to purchase them. That will then be pushed into GCC territory, and the leadership will also allow Palestine to grow under, again, vassal state of the GCC as well as the Levant. And they will all be connected through the rails with the financial industrial complex, the GCC. But the difference is the forever war model is over. And so Israel is no longer needed. And so eventually you'll probably end up with one state solution, Arab majority, the hardliners leaving, going back to Europe. Europe will get worse and worse and worse. And those that naturally wanted to, de-radicalize and get on with their neighbors will just become essentially a vassalized normal state, which may destabilize via the West Bank or something. And eventually we'll get two-state solution, one-state solution. But the point is GCC vassalized region as well. And that's what I believe will happen to the Palestinian Authority as well. The likely next steps, as I said, regime change, Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. Regional stability will follow. And I think we enter into a new world order. So I'll keep following the money. We are in mid-November having a White House meeting between MBS of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and he will be visiting the White House in mid-November. What am I expecting for that November meeting? Potentially a big announcement on security. Maybe we'll get that next week. But maybe that will just be completely avoided. I'm pretty sure he won't talk about oil or anything like that, or getting down the price of oil in order to support the deflationary side. I think they're just going to be focusing on artificial intelligence investments. Trump will be bragging about he's rich, he's got all his money, huge cash. He's going to be investing in OpenAI. He's going to be investing in NVIDIA. But what is foreign direct investment? That is the GCC gaining control while their customer is China and BRICS. That's where all their money is coming in. And then they're reinvesting it now, America's energy independent, to acquire all the assets, which gives them influence over BlackRock and the financial industrial complex to get that regional stability. So Trump will be asset stripping America over to the Gulf countries, which will reduce the influence, the America First agenda, which is the government, because they're not aligned, they're subordinate. And the America First agenda will just be subordinate to the proof of weapons network, which is why I believe we're seeing destabilization campaign. There was an announcement to give you an idea of what what may happen. Doing some predictions. So there was an announcement that Israel is going to be selling 49% of its state-owned firm, Israel Aerospace Industries. IAI is the ticker. This is essentially the most important weapons manufacturer, alongside, I think, within Israel. And this is basically what governments do when they are in distress and they lose a war. They sell it to the winning forces, and the winning forces of the GCC aligned and the financial industrial complex. So I bet that the Proof of Weapons Network and the GCC will buy IAI in the 49% stake, and we'll expect many, many more deals just like this. Because, I mean, Israel, when they were, they resisted privatization on the stock market of IAI for quite some time. The largest investors were European Union aligned financial industrial complex, as well as US aligned fund managers on the node as well. But the cost of war has basically changed. And this is how I think we're going to see that vassalization. And by early 2027, I imagine that the economy without US support would lead to more and more need for more and more deals like this. We already saw Israeli steel company go bankrupt, and that was after Turkey sanctions. And I'd imagine that it's going to be UAE that will come out and bail that out. And so this is why you're starting to see they already normalized through the Abraham Accords that UAE is building and allowing for this as bad cop as the one that's able to work with Israel and work with the West. They're allowing the embassies, and these are the types of things I expect to see more. So I expect to see more and more deals. And that is how you connect all of these three major geopolitical stories together. And if you're just listening to media, you'll be thinking World War III is around the corner. America dominates the world. Israel controls America, because that's the narrative they want you to believe. But when you follow the money, you can see what's happening. And everything that the politicians are saying is they're lying to you about everything. And the media is controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network as well. So it's all narrative to justify crimes against humanity, while you pay through inflation for your demise and civil unrest campaign. That's why I encourage everybody to exit and boycott the system. And fortunately, there are ways of doing that. The central banks are doing that via gold. The financial industrial complex is trying to get as much Bitcoin from you and over to their Wall Street buddies. And so you can resist by boycotting the Federal Reserve by owning Bitcoin. You can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody rather than via an ETF. You can boycott the banks by not mining any fiat currency debt, by borrowing against your Bitcoin, and instead building a wealth effect by owning more Bitcoin every month. Do that for a minimum of 4 years throughout this whole change. And historically, I can't give financial advice, but that's outperformed the entire Proof of Weapons Network and all their financial weapons of mass destruction. And then with that wealth, you can control the flow of your money when you hold it in self-custody. You can leave your country. You can take your wealth with you. You can decide whether you are in a country that will be switching to an exit tax. You can plan efficiently. You can stop funding the Proof of Weapons Network because the government is just subordinate to it. You can do it in a completely legal way. And then you can spend local. Make sure your money is going towards investing, if you're investing in decentralization, in local business. Spend your money local as much as possible. Boycott where you can. It's not easy because sometimes you need to not boycott in order to have a greater strategy to have more influence. There's never going to be perfection. There can only be better and incremental improvements, because you don't, just because it's not perfect, it doesn't mean you don't do it, because you got to do things to the best of your ability, given the limitations and the reality of all the power dynamics in the world. And so that's what I would like everybody to do. And so always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. And the orange pill is the antithesis to the red pill. And some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. And I want you to stay on the right side of the change. I'm hoping with a wealth effect, you can do it with peace, love, and unity, and we can build our community together. And I'll keep covering and following the money in This Week in Bitcoin, This Week in Macro, This Week in Geopolitics. All I ask for you to do is we create artificial intelligence synthesis. We break it down into 3. If you just want the Bitcoin content, the macro, the geopolitics, share what's interested to those people. And then we'll try and create those shorter AI videos that condenses down all of this information in my head and communicates it in a clearer way, in a shorter fashion as well. So please do share those, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And in case YouTube bans me, we'll be streaming on Rumble and X. Follow me on X. I give real-time updates. And in case I get cancelled, I'll continue to do live streams within the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. You can get a free membership to it. And within there, you can get a complete guide on how to self-custody. There's no sponsorship. I'm not guiding you to any companies. There's no agenda. I don't have monetization on. I don't need to do clickbait. But I do want you to share this content because I would like as many people as possible to gain access to this content. So that's everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 105. Is the Proof of Weapons Network weaponizing Christianity? The answer is yes. It's weaponizing Islam, it's weaponizing Judaism, it's weaponizing Christianity to create useful idiots, divide and conquer, and hate each other. And in This Week in Bitcoin, we covered the different aspects. We covered the different aspects on the macro side, and we covered the different side on the geopolitical side. So we're going to move over